So, I want you to picture this. You're in a relationship. Not perfect, but you're trying. You're showing up. You're doing the good partner thing. Then one day, out of nowhere, she hits you with a sentence that sounds romantic, but feels like a trap. She looks at me and says, "If you really loved me, you'd cancel everything." Not, "Can we talk about this?" Not, "I'm feeling insecure." Not even, "Can you reschedule?" No. Cancel everything. My plans, my work thing, my weekend, my entire life for that moment. And I remember laughing a little because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She said it again, slower this time. "If you loved me, you wouldn't even hesitate." And in that moment, I could have argued. I could have said, "That's not fair." I could have asked, "Why are you making love a test?" But I didn't. I looked at my calendar, I looked at her, and I said the one thing she least expected. "Okay." I agreed. I canceled everything. And I need you to understand, when I say everything, I mean everything. Plans I'd made weeks ahead, commitments I couldn't just redo, a personal situation with my family that mattered a lot to me. Gone. One message, one call. Canceled. And at first, she smiled. Not relieved. Smiled like she'd won something. Like she'd just proven she could move me wherever she wanted. That should have been my first warning. Because after that, it wasn't, "Thank you." It wasn't, "I appreciate you." It was, "See, that wasn't hard." And right there, right in that tiny sentence, something changed. Not in the relationship, in me. Because that's when I realized this wasn't about love, it was about power. And agreeing to her ultimatum didn't save the relationship, it taught her a lesson, a dangerous one, that if she pushed hard enough, I'd fold. So yeah, I canceled everything, and that decision changed the relationship forever, but not in the way she thought it would. Before you decide I'm some spineless guy who just folds under pressure, let me slow this down and give you context. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't afraid of being alone, and I wasn't ignoring obvious red flags on purpose. At that point in my life, I was stable. I had my own place, a solid job, strong relationships with my family and friends. I wasn't the type to cancel plans lightly. In fact, I was usually the guy people relied on because I followed through. And this wasn't a new relationship either. We'd been together long enough that compromises were normal. You know how it goes. Sometimes you adjust, sometimes they do. That's what healthy relationships are supposed to be. That's why this moment mattered. This wasn't me giving in out of fear. This was me genuinely thinking, okay, maybe she's having a hard day. Maybe this matters more to her than I realize. I wasn't trying to prove love. I wasn't trying to win points. I was trying to be understanding. And if I'm being honest, part of me believed something else too. I believed that if I showed her I could prioritize her, she'd feel secure, that she'd appreciate it, that she'd meet me halfway next time. That belief, that's what made the next part hit so hard. Because once you prove you're willing to cancel your life on demand, you don't get gratitude, you get expectations. And I didn't realize it yet, but by agreeing so easily, I'd just moved an invisible line. A line she would keep pushing, over and over and over again. Looking back now, the signs were always there. They just didn't show up all at once. Before that ultimatum, she wasn't openly controlling. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten to leave. In fact, if you asked her, she'd say she just liked closeness. But closeness to her always meant adjusting to her schedule. If we were deciding where to go, she'd say, "I don't care," but somehow we always ended up where she wanted. If I had plans with friends, she wouldn't forbid them. She'd just get quiet, distant, disappointed. And I'd feel that pressure, not spoken, felt. She'd say things like, "I just thought we'd spend more time together. I guess I'll be alone then. I don't need much, just you." On the surface, That sounds loving, but over time it started costing me things. I missed a birthday dinner because she had a bad day. I left early from a work event because she felt ignored. I stopped talking about certain plans because I knew how the conversation would go. And every time I adjusted, she got more comfortable asking for more. That's why the ultimatum hit differently. It wasn't random, it was the biggest version of something she'd been doing quietly for a long time. And when I agreed, when I canceled everything without pushing back, I didn't just give her what she wanted that day, I showed her something else. That if she framed it as love, I'd sacrifice without question. And that changed the balance. Because from that moment on, it wasn't about what we both needed, it was about what she expected. After I canceled everything, I expected something. Gratitude, reassurance, at least a conversation. Instead, what I got was quiet satisfaction. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she appreciated it. She just said, "See, that wasn't so hard." And that sentence sat with me in a way I couldn't shake. Because here's the thing, when you do something big for someone out of love, it usually brings you closer. This didn't. It felt like I'd just passed a test I didn't know I signed up for. And once I passed it, the tests didn't stop. A week later, she asked me to cancel another plan, this time something smaller. When I hesitated, she tilted her head and said, "Why is this suddenly an issue? You didn't mind last time." That's when I felt it, the shift. Before, it was requests. Now it was expectations. If I tried to explain my side, she'd sigh and say I was overthinking. If I stood my ground, she'd say I was changing. And if I gave in, everything was calm again. No arguments, no tension, just peace. But it was a fragile peace, one that only existed if I stayed quiet and compliant. That's when logic finally kicked in. I started asking myself questions I'd been avoiding. Why does love always feel like a sacrifice, but only on my side? Why does disagreeing feel like I'm doing something wrong? Why am I explaining basic boundaries like they're betrayals? The turning point wasn't a fight, it was a realization. I wasn't choosing her over my life, I was slowly giving my life away, and she didn't see a problem with that at all. After that, nothing exploded. And that's the part people don't warn you about. When a relationship is actually breaking, it doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it just quietly rearranges your life. I started canceling things without being asked. If friends invited me out, I'd hesitate before replying. If my family wanted to plan something, I'd think, will this be a problem? Not because she told me not to go, but because I already knew how it would feel if I did. Disappointment, distance, that subtle silence that made you feel like you'd failed a test again. So I adjusted. I left work events early, I stopped planning weekends in advance, I made myself more available just in case. And here's the dangerous part. She started expecting it. If I didn't immediately say yes to something she wanted, she'd say, "You're acting different lately." If I mentioned something important to me, she'd respond with, "So where do I fit into that?" It was never a direct accusation. It was always framed as emotion. And that made it harder to push back, because who wants to argue with someone's feelings? Meanwhile, my life was shrinking. Friends stopped inviting me as often, my family noticed I was always busy. Even at work, I was less present because I was constantly checking my phone. And every time I felt uncomfortable about it, I told myself the same lie. This is just what relationships require. But deep down, something felt off, because love isn't supposed to feel like you're slowly disappearing. And the scariest part, she seemed happier the smaller my world became. The moment everything really shifted wasn't loud, it was subtle. One night I told her I couldn't cancel something. Nothing huge, just a prior commitment I'd already adjusted around too many times. She didn't argue. She just looked at me and said, "Wow, I didn't think you'd choose that over me." And there it was, the same test, different wording, except this time I didn't fold. I calmly said, "I'm not choosing it over you. I'm just choosing it." Her face changed, not angry, disappointed, controlled. She went quiet for the rest of the night. No affection, short answers, that familiar distance again. But this time, I didn't rush to fix it. I sat with the discomfort, and that's when I realized something important. The silence wasn't about being hurt, it was about regaining control. Because the next morning she said something that made it all click. She said, "I don't know what's gotten into you lately. You used to do things without questioning them." Without questioning them. That was it. That was the entire relationship in one sentence. The escalation came fast after that. Every boundary I set became selfish. Every decision that didn't center her became proof I cared less. Every conversation turned into a scoreboard of sacrifices I'd made versus hers. And for the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. She didn't want partnership. She wanted priority. Unconditional, unquestioned, unbalanced. And once I stopped playing along, the relationship couldn't survive it, because control only works when one person keeps giving in. We didn't break up in a dramatic way. There was no final argument, no screaming match, no ultimatums this time. Just a conversation that felt tired. She told me she felt like I was pulling away. I told her I felt like I'd been shrinking. She said relationships require sacrifice. I said they also require respect. And for the first time, neither of us tried to convince the other. A week later, we ended it. Calmly, mutually, or at least it looked that way from the outside. But here's the part that stayed with me. After the breakup, I started doing things again. Seeing friends without guilt, making plans without rehearsing excuses, spending time with my family without checking my phone. And I realized something I wish I'd seen sooner. Love shouldn't feel like a test you're constantly studying for. It shouldn't require you to cancel your life to prove your loyalty. And if someone says, "If you really loved me, you'd cancel everything," what they're really asking is, "How much of yourself are you willing to give up for me?" I agreed once, and it taught her she could ask again. But the moment I stopped agreeing, the relationship had no foundation left. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: boundaries don't ruin relationships, they reveal them. Thanks for listening.